Hello, Brabanters. I'm your podcast host, Joe Worley. Today, I'm going to chat with you about stallion selection, the ins and outs, what to consider, breeding contracts, and so much more you may not have considered yet. Let's get started. This is the Brabant Bulletin brought to you by the European Brabant Registry of America, where people, passion, and preservation are our mission. It's that time once again, Brabanters. It's breeding season. The days are getting longer, horses are shedding, and mares are coming into estrus. Perhaps you've already started casually scrolling through Facebook or stallionsnow.com for your mare's next match, or maybe you've already swiped right on a few. Before you settle on a stud, though, here's a few things to think about. First of all, take a long, hard, honest look at your mare. Ask yourself what you like about her, and then think about what you don't. Be critical. If you're too biased and love blind for you to see your own horse's faults, you can always ask a fellow Brabanter to assess her for you. Here's a few things to assess her for: temperament, conformation, trainability, work ethic, soundness, health. Once you've narrowed down her shortcomings, you can start shopping for a stallion who will offset those. And listen, the stallion may have a few faults here or there too. No animal's 100% perfect. The goal is to find a match that hopefully balances out through the offspring. Now, let's talk about pedigree. The European Brabant breed is tiny, and if you're going to go for a high percentage of purebred offspring, your options are limited. With that said, it's important to look for an inbreeding coefficient. That's the number of common ancestors the two horses share in their bloodlines. Naturally, you want to avoid incestuous breedings, which means you shouldn't breed your mare to her brother, sire, or grandsire, and so on. Geneticists suggest trying to keep the inbreeding below 5% and to consider sacrificing a bit of type for the sake of preserving genomic health within our breed. If your mare is registered with the European Brabant Registry of America, you can quickly check the inbreeding coefficient using the grassroots system. Simply visit europeanbrabant.com, and under the Registry tab, you'll see an online registry. Click that tab and it'll take you to Grassroots, where you can log in and use the Test a Mating feature. This allows you to pick a stallion within our registry to see if they're related, and if so, how closely. If the Brabant stallion you're considering isn't registered with the EBRA, don't despair. You can always hand jam your mare's pedigree and the stallion's pedigree into an inbreeding calculator online. The University of Montreal has one for horses online at labgenvet.ca. That's labgenvet.ca. that you can use. So, speaking of stallion registration, the European Brabant is special, beautiful, colorful, and people are naturally crazy about them. We are too, right? But this craze has sparked some unscrupulous stallion owners who make false claims about their horse's heritage. Some folks with great stallions who have a draft body type and roan coloring are passed off as being Brabants, but there's no documentation to prove that claim. Now listen, I'm not saying there isn't a chance that somewhere in the breeding is a Brabant, but how do you really know? Therefore, we want you to be cautious about horses who are not registered and verified. I'm going to go a step further and say that even if the stallion is registered with the Belgian Draft Horse Corporation of America or the American Brabant Association, may not be a fully purebred European Brabant. For instance, prior to the BDHCA closing their registry to imports, they recognized Brabants into their stud book. These horses were crossed with American Belgians or crossed with other recently imported progeny. To know a stallion's percentage of Brabant in this instance, you have to do some pedigree tracing. The same goes for the American Brabant. The American Brabant is a new American draft horse breed that's different from, say, our Tier 1 registered purebred European Brabants and their brethren living in Belgium and the Netherlands. American Brabant Book 1 stallions may only have as little as 25% European Brabant bloodlines, so you have to do your homework. The ABA's emphasis is on developing a workhorse phenotype rather than the breed preservation like us at the EBRA. It's also important to know that the ABA's Book 1 registered horses are derived from a variety of crossbreeds to include Percheron, Suffolk Punch, American Belgian, and German Rhenish. We're not here to dissuade you from breeding to an American Brabant stallion, but if your goal is to have a high percentage offspring, you have to be aware of the American Brabant stallion's verifiable European Brabant heritage. One other thing to note here is that the ABA considers the German Rhenish Cold Blood breed to be 100%. While the German Rhenish is a Brabant heritage breed, the EBRA does not automatically recognize these horses as 100% without additional pedigree verification. If you're considering a BDHCA or ABA stallion as your next sire and you want help calculating their European Brabant heritage, we can help you. Simply email Rebecca at registrar@europeanbrabant.com. No matter what, request a copy of the stallion's registration form so that you can submit that to the EBRA when applying for your offspring's EBRA registration. Now, let's turn our attention to offspring. As you narrow down your list of potential sires, be sure to ask yourself, what will they be used for? Are you aiming to breed a horse for a particular discipline? If you're going to keep the offspring for riding or driving, consider the stud's athleticism. Nature and workability. Are you hoping for a shorter horse? Consider your mare's size and that of the stallion's. Perhaps you're trying to breed up your European Brabant to a higher percentage. If that's the case, then you need to look for a stallion whose heritage is greater than 93.75 or 15/16 verifiable European Brabant heritage. If you're breeding for a certain discipline, then it's important to see what the stallion's capabilities are. Confirmation photos of a stallion are nice, but they don't provide a full picture of his physicality. When possible, go see that stallion in person. Watch him in action. See what his temperament is like in hand, under saddle, or in harness. If you can't go see him, ask the stallion owner for videos of him moving and or working. Talk to other people who have seen him in person and ask for their thoughts, both positive and negative. Consider doing an FBI background check on the horse to see if it's been involved in any felonious actions. Speak to people who have bred to him before and see what kind of offspring he produces. It's okay to ask the stallion owner lots of questions. Ask about his health, soundness, temperament, work history, and the like. You should also ask about genetic testing. For example, does he have a DNA profile on hand? And has he been tested for JEB or PSSM1? All EBRA, BDHCA, and ABA registered stallions should have a negative JEB test, and most have a PSSM1 test result on file. But unregistered stallions may not. If the answer is no, ask the stallion owner if they will provide you with some pulled mane hair for testing that you can send to a lab for analysis, or if they're willing to do the testing themselves ahead of breed contract agreements. For one, a stallion's genetics directly impact their offspring. JEB and PSSM1 can be passed on to their foals. If the resulting offspring of your mare and stallion pairing is a colt who's positive for JEB, it's highly likely they will be disqualified as a future breeding stallion within the EBRA, BDHCA, and ABA. Each registry has a set genetic health standard requirement, but studs with JEB are universally disqualified. Given the prevalence of PSSM1 in all draft horse breeds, the EBRA does not disqualify carriers from the breeding pool. If you aren't familiar with PSSM1, you can always read our comprehensive blog. Visit EuropeanBrabant.com. Click the blog icon and look for the title, Understanding PSSM in Brabants. Most draft horses with PSSM1 are asymptomatic, and with proper diet and exercise, they live long, happy lives. According to research, the gene is believed to have developed several hundred years ago, and Dr. Beth Valentine suggests the trait was sought after by farmers and selectively bred in draft horses. Where PSSM1 may factor into your stallion choice is when you're crossing a light horse with a draft horse who is a PSSM1 carrier. These draft cross offspring who inherit PSSM1 have the potential, not a guarantee mind you, but the potential to develop PSSM1 related symptoms due to their light horse heritage. However, if you're covering a draft mare with a draft stallion, don't get too hung up on PSSM1. In the end, whether breeding for full draft or half draft, PSSM1 can be managed. Again, check out our blog. Another genetic test you may be interested in is its color. If you're breeding for a certain color, say blue roan, solid bay, or black, knowing your mare's color factors is the step that includes a base coat color test and roan zygosity test if they're roan. The EBRA offers a spectrum of color tests through UC Davis, so be sure to check those out. In order to definitively calculate the probability of color outcomes of offspring, You'll need the stallion's color test results too. If one or neither are color tested, let me give you a little cheat sheet while you wait for test results. According to Animal Genetics Lab, a bay roan and a blue roan pairing will result in a bay roan foal 52.73% of the time. And there's just a 17.58 chance the foal will be solid bay or blue roan. These outcomes are based on unknown red factors, agouti extensions, and roan genes. Now, where the genetic testing helps narrow down the outcomes is knowing for certain the horse's base coat colors and roan factors. We have a great write-up on color genetics on the blog if you want to dive in more. I know I keep harping on our blog, but it's full of great information, so I can't help it. Now here's where I take a moment to say color is great, but the EBRA suggests that you don't sacrifice conformation and pedigree for color. There are some incredible stallions out there with unique bloodlines who may not be the color you desire. Please don't overlook them for the sake of color. Okay, let's talk about fertility. Your mare's reproductive abilities are going to be the biggest factor in whether you can get her bred and settled. That said, the stallion can influence your odds too. Assuming a mare is healthy and ready for breeding, let's focus on the stallion's fertility. Find out as much as you can about a sire's previous fertility record and pregnancy rates. One surefire way to determine a stallion's virility is to ask what percentage of mares covered per season have actually settled in foal. If the stallion is a youngster with a short breeding history, you can always ask the stallion owner if his semen has ever been analyzed for concentration, motility, progressive motility, and morphology. The gold standard for freshly collected sperm motility for breeding stallions is 65%, and 50% of those sperm should be progressively motile. However, each stallion may vary slightly, so don't dismiss a stallion whose numbers fall below industry standards. There may have been one reason or another why his numbers weren't stellar on the day of the testing, such as stress, diet, over-teasing, etc. There are examples of European Brabant stallions with motility rates that fall below the industry average, who still have a 100% pregnancy track record. The mare analysis just lets you know he's got a little something mare owners can work with, if you know what I mean. Cooled and frozen semen numbers are different, and my fellow podcast host, Stacey Pearsall, will be diving into semen quality, as well as the ins and outs cooled and frozen semen in the next episode of the Brabant Bulletin, so be sure to tune in to hear more about that. At any rate, you should familiarize yourself with breeding terminology if you aren't already well versed in the topic. That way you can fully understand what the stallion owner is talking about, what questions you need to ask, and what the breeding contract is saying. So now that I've mentioned contracts, let's dive into the breeding agreements. You should always have something in writing with the stallion owner. Agreements help both parties understand what's being offered and what's not. It leaves no room for interpretation and alleviates potential conflict down the road, should something go sideways. A good stallion agreement should, at a minimum, include the following information. The parties of the contract, i.e., the owners of the mare and the stallion. This section should include the address and phone number for each party. The breeding stallion should be clearly identified with any information available, including a registration name and number. The location of the stallion should also be identified. There should be a guarantee of a breeding certificate, which verifies your mare was bred and when. If the breeding contract is designed for one particular mare, the mare's information should also be identified to include their registered name and registered number. If the stallion is covering multiple mares, those mares should be listed along with their registration information if applicable. All fees should be included within the contract, including mare care, vet fees, and farrier fees. Those are typically the responsibility of the mare owner. When a brood mare is stabled at the stallion owner's facility, disputes sometimes arise when management arranges for the mare to receive professional services such as veterinary or farrier attention. Mare owners can request a contract that stipulates advanced notice and an opportunity for the mare owner to consent to such services, except possibly in emergency situations when the mare's owner can't be reached, or if the mare owner does not approve certain procedures such as invasive testing. He or she can insist that the contract specify that no permission is granted for specified services. By comparison, stallion managers handling visiting mares often prefer language within the breeding contract giving broad authorization to arrange for routine or emergency professional services at their discretion, such as inoculation, reproductive examinations, hoof trimming, or others. Most breeding contracts contain a live foal guarantee. Any such guarantees should be included and clarified in the contract. Some shipped cooled semen come with such guarantees, but some don't. Most frozen semen breedings do not. That's why this item is important to have on the contract. The contract should include the type of breeding, whether live cover or artificial insemination, using cooled or frozen semen. This should also include the time of breeding and an expiration date. Basically, this item states that the breeding contract is good for this year's breeding season only. In the case of frozen semen, the stallion owner may outline that the semen is for covering one mare with no expiration, that sort of thing. A contract should identify the mare owner's right to rebreed. Allowance and circumstances concerning selling a breeding to a third party should also be addressed. This is important for those who are purchasing frozen semen. Let's say the contract was for covering of a particular mare, and the mare passes away unexpectedly. The mare owner should have the right to transfer that breeding to another mare or to sell their dose to another mare owner. The breeding contract can specify whether or not and when the mare owner is entitled to receive a partial or full refund. For example, the mare owner might only have one mare to breed. If something happens to the mare before the breeding takes place, a refund would be far more important than an option to breed with a substitute mare. Conversely, if the mare owner is interested in the genetic match between a mare and a specified stallion, should that stallion die or become infertile before the breeding can take place, a refund would be far more important than the stallion owner's right to select a substitute stallion to fulfill that contract. Mare owners who seek to fulfill rebreeding rights under the breeding contract are sometimes surprised to learn that they are expected to pay additional booking fees. To avoid misunderstandings on the issue, mare owners should look for how the contract defines rebreeding rights. Other important aspects of a good breeding contract include liability waivers, lien, security interest, equine activity liability, act and jurisdiction, and venue. It's important to keep in mind that equine law varies from state to state. Often in live cover breeding situations, the jurisdiction will fall under the state in which the stallion is standing at stud. If some of that legalese went right over your head, let me take a moment to explain a few of these terminologies. Lien security interest is a provision that will give the stallion or farm owner a lien and security interest in the mare and resulting foal for any unpaid breeding fees, mare care, veterinarian, or farrier bills. This protects the stallion owner or farm owner if the mare owner doesn't pay. An Equine Activity Liability Act line item may be included because the breeding contract also serves as a boarding agreement in live cover situations where you drop your mare at the stallion owner's farm for breeding. Finally, a jurisdiction venue clause is a provision stating that local jurisdiction and venue are required if a lawsuit is brought after a dispute. Similarly, the stallion owner should provide that his or her home state law applies to any disputes. Be aware, mare owners, you should only enter into contracts with someone who has authority over the stallion. Never accept a contract signed by an employee or agent unless you have first confirmed that the party presenting the contract and signing has the authority to do so. If the stallion is managed by someone other than its owner, the contract should specify that the manager has authority to transact business on behalf of the owner and, of course, execute contracts. And unless a farm name is a true legal entity, such as a corporation or limited liability company, it should not be named as a party to contract. The contract can include a clause stating that the party signing the contract on behalf of an entity, such as a partnership, corporation, or LLC, is duly authorized to do so and to bind the entity to the terms of the contract. This issue has actually come up in litigation over the years. The stallion's availability during the breeding months is critical. Some stallions maintain showing schedules while advertised to the public for breeding. For breedings requiring timely access to the stallion, breeding with fresh semen via live cover or artificial insemination, or cooled shipped semen as opposed to frozen semen that can be stored for shipment, the contract should specify a range of months in which the stallion is available. Remember, as I said before, the health of the stallion is vitally important, as it can directly affect the health of the mare, her offspring, and even the mare owner's farm. The breeding contract should certify that the stallion is in good health. and whether or not, for example, he's a carrier of diseases such as equine viral arteritis, EVA, and sexually transmitted diseases like equine metritis. Mare owners might want assurances within the breeding contract that the stallion has been tested for any or all of these, and that they require health certificates on other mares who are coming in for breeding. It's a lot to mull over, but I hope this episode has helped you some. If you still have burning questions, we're here to help. Simply email us at info@europeanbrabant.com, and we'll do our very best to guide you. Well, Brabanters, that concludes this episode of the Brabant Bulletin. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast. Until next time, don't forget, to ride a Brabant is to fly without wings.